go. And thank you so much for having me tonight. I think that's going to be fun. Wait a second. I'm just going to still have the chat box pop on my side. There we go. So it's my very first time with Zoom. I did a couple of Hangouts, but yeah, I think I have everything right. I'm going to keep the chat box on the side. So if you have any questions during the talk, just blurb it there. I also have, like, my talk is in 3 big sections. So I'm going to pause in between each of them. And if you have questions there, by all means, ask them. Also, I have a crap ton of slides, but there's nothing that says that I have to use all of them, that I have to give all my presentation tonight. So whenever you people have enough of it, we can stop, or we can go in different directions. I'm totally cool with anything. So yeah, let's begin. So yeah, new JavaScript experience for the Jaded Perler. And by the way, you will see that everything is error-based because, well, one, JavaScript, and second, I gave the first version of that talk a long time ago at around Halloween night. So it was just kind of the theme. So yeah, why this? Well, oh yeah, and by the way, I put in the chat the link to the slides. So if you want to follow on your own browser, you can go ahead. And yeah, so many years ago, I was a little bored and I wanted to learn new things. And I thought that, well, JavaScript is having a revival. Everybody's talking about it these days. That will be a good excuse to just begin to dip my toes in that ecosystem and see what is going on there. And since it's always better to have a goal to be able to experience with things, I said, okay, I'm going to implement a game. That's easy. Everybody can do that. So I'm a big fan of BattleTech, and I thought that, okay, BattleTech is a little involved because there's actually terrains, there's a lot of things to keep track of. So let's begin with a spaceship game where basically you don't have to deal with anything but the spaceships. That should be fun. Well, that was many years ago. And if you ask me, the game is still in its early development. But in the meantime, I learned a couple of technologies. And when I say a couple, I mean a lot. I went a little wild and just tried everything and anything in the JavaScript world, since I was beginning from scratch, and it was a perfect project to just try things, see what works, what doesn't work, what I like, what is a little more meh. And I thought that, well, that game is probably never going to see the day, but I can at least recycle my experience and just share with people all the things that I came across. So yeah, basically, this talk is not a deep dive. What I'm going to do is go through all of those things and give a couple of short descriptions of what they're doing, if I like them, I don't like them, show maybe one example or two. The goal is to make you notice things and make you want to check it in more details on your own time, or maybe, I don't know, ask me back for something else. I'm also going to draw parallels with what we already have in the Perl world, such that you can compare apple to apples-ish. And who knows, maybe that you will also discover a couple of Perl modules that you didn't know before. And yeah, so basically full exploration, and it's about to begin, so strap in. So it's going to be in 4 parts. Oh yeah, not 3, 4. So I'm first going to talk about just general tools for any given project, and then I'm going to talk about technologies and libraries, frameworks for the 3 parts of my game, which is the game engine itself, so the logical part, the REST service that I'm using to actually host the different games that I have, and finally the web UI part of it to actually have people be able to look at it and play with it. So part the first, the trimmings. First thing first, And somebody already asked, most important thing in a project is to give a talk about it. And to give a talk, you need to have slides. So a long time ago, and I think like 8 to 10 years, I discovered Reveal.js. That is what you're looking at right now. And it's super pretty. It has a lot of shortcuts that are very nice. But by itself, you have to actually write your slides in HTML, which is, yeah, not exactly fun. So something like 1 month after I discovered Reveal, I decided that, hey, it will actually be nice to write my slides in Markdown and have it automatically converted to HTML and then use that. So I wrote a little something called app chorus. And basically, yeah, it glues a Markdown parser to the Reveal.js stuff. And it used Dancer as its base service. And yeah, basically, its two killer features is that you write your slides in Markdown. It has a little bit of a WebSocket support such that you can actually publish your slides and have people go to your site. And as you change the slides, this change magically on everybody's browser. And that was nice. That was fine. And it served me right for a couple of years. Until recently, I discovered Reveal MD, which does exactly the same thing, but beautifully, it's not maintained by me, so I don't actually have to do any work. So yeah, very quickly, this is what a slide will look like. So basically, you put the big title, you can put images, you can put link, just regular Markdown. And basically on the command line, you just do reveal-md. And since this is JavaScript, you have a couple of goodies. You can say watch, and it's going to reload itself as soon as you change the slides. So you can actually write your slides and see how they're going to look like at the same time. You can put a preprocessor that is going to munch your Markdown before it's being rendered into HTML. So that allows you to do some things like in your slides have a fake protocol called cpan that is going to convert that into the regular meta cpan URLs. So it's a very nice software. And yeah, so far I'm using that for all my slides. So yay for that. Now, a couple of slides back, you saw that I was using a graph. So yeah, diagrams. In Perl, we could use things like graph easy that is going to turn something into SVG. In the JavaScript world, we have Mermaid and its CLI tool called mermaid.cli. It can do graphs like what you saw, can also do sequences, Gantt charts, UML classes for object and classes, can even mock Git commit flows. So it's pretty neat. Its source code reads a little bit like Markdown. And yeah, it's pretty easy to get used to it. Basically, you put a node, the arrow, the node where it's going to. If you're feeling fancy in between, you can put text that is going to go over the link. And that's all that is needed to create your graph. The only thing that makes me a little bit sad about it is that, so Mermaid by default works in the browser, but as I said, you have the CLI tool to actually generate stuff from the CLI. But they do that by actually using Puppeteer, which itself uses Chrome in the background. So basically, if you want to have the luxury of creating your graph from the command line, you need to install that, which means that it's 350 megs roughly of install for every repo where you want to have mermaid.cli. In modern hard drive, that's not that bad, but still it's it's heavy. Task runners. In Perl and everything else, there's of course the good old makefile. It doing its thing. It's a little old, In the JavaScript world, by default, scripts are defined in the package.json. And when your different commands that you want to run are something that is a single command, like you just want to run just something, that's fine. But as soon as you have commands that are a little more involved, where you want to run several commands, it can get silly pretty fast. I mean, at some point, a string of 600 characters is just too much. So JavaScript has a lot of test runners. There's two that had their heydays a couple of years back, Grunt and Gulp. And yeah, at some point I played with a Gulp thing in Perl called Pulp. And these days there's slightly less use. You have run.js that is kind of basic, but give you basic task definition. At some point, I began to look at something called Go task that is actually in Go, as the name implies. That is interesting because just like Ansible and other things, it's using YAML for its configuration. So basically, you don't have to know anything about Go. Everything is defined using YAML, and you can use mustache-like annotations for variables. So that's pretty nice. Unfortunately, it has no concept, or at least didn't have last time that I checked, of loops, which means that if you want to give an array and say that, okay, do that specific command for every single one of them, you have to list them one by one by one, which is a little bit of a pain. So, of course, I had to try my hand, and I wrote app.do, which is basically a port of it. It's kind of working. It's so-so. These days, I went to something else in JavaScript called ProMake, which is a promise-based, and that's why it's called ProMake, makefile clone. It's okay. Basically, it will give you the required tools to run commands. You can define your task as you see there. You can set up dependencies, so the usual stuff that you need. There's maybe a little too much parentheses for my taste, and I still want eventually to go back to my app.do and try to do it in Perl, because that will, I have the feeling, be slightly more concise and more up to the point. But yeah, for the time being, ProMake does what I want, and yeah, good enough. Package managers. In the Perl world, we have cpan-, that nowadays is pretty much the one that everybody uses. We have the two older ones, cpan and cpan plus. There's a new version of cpan-m that, oh yeah, don't remember the name, but anyway, I think that the code by now is part of cpan-m. So yep, basically cpan-m is the king. In JavaScript, you have npm, which is the default. You have yarn, that is alternative that is out there. And there's something else that not a lot of people know about that is called pnpm. And that one is slightly less used. It's not backed up by a big corporation like the first two, but it has something that is super useful. Because unlike in Perl, where by default everything is installed globally and it's only installed locally if you actually specify it, JavaScript is the other way around. Everything is installed locally just in case. And that's fine. That protects you of installing something globally and just destroying all your projects. But it also means that as soon as you install something, well, it's installed for each and every single one of your projects. And if you're somebody like me who has something like 100 projects on GitHub, yeah, the memory get up real fast. So basically, the killer feature of pnpm is that instead of copying everything locally, it put hard links locally, which means that you still have all those localized node module checkouts. But if you use the same module in the same version of the module in different projects, there's only one real physical copy that exists in the big repo somewhere on your hard disk. So yeah, if you have old hard drive like me that don't have terabytes, that's a boon. Now we're getting to some of the core things of JavaScript development. Babel. In Perl, we have it fairly easy. I mean, basically, Perl has one interpreter. I mean, 1.5 if you think about Strawberry Perl. But then again, that's pretty much all the same. There's some variation of the language, of course, version after version. If some people want to be fancy, they can alter a little bit the language using filter modules or adding new keywords. But that's all things that you can install. It works fine. The changes between versions are fairly well defined and minimal. So Perl is Perl is Perl. JavaScript, not so much. Basically, you have what we call JavaScript. That is, in fact, what we call ECMAScript. That has still very much evolving different versions. You have also all those different interpreters that exist. You have, of course, one for every browser. And not all browsers are supporting the same thing, not supporting the same thing in the same way. You have, of course, Node.js, which is the one on the command line. And if that's not enough for you, you have some superset of JavaScript like TypeScript, Flow, and JSX when you are using that weird JavaScript and HTML tagging for React and the other component frameworks. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so basically that's where Babel entered the picture. And what it does is that it will take the dialect that you're using locally, and that can be any of the flavor that we just saw, and it's going to transpile that to bare bone, vanilla, super dumb, super normal JavaScript that in theory should work everywhere. So basically, if you ever use Dizilla in Perl, think of Babel as pretty much Dizilla, but for your general code base. So basically, you write shortcuts that befit you in your repo, and Babel is going to convert that into code that looks or is going to work with all the different interpreters out there. And basically, to use Babel, what you have to do is to install it. And then you have a configuration file where you mostly define all the different plugins that you're going to use. So you can use plugins to actually use some parts of the new standards that are not in the interpreter themselves. You can do things that will, for example, here put aliases for your import paths. So a lot of things to munch your code before it's generated for general use. And to use it is just Babel the code that you want to transform, and usually where you want the output to be dumped at. Pretty simple. The next big one is Webpack. So yeah, JavaScript on the browser still has the limitation that you cannot easily import from other files. So basically, you need to have tools that will take all your source code and is going to generate that into a single file that can then be imported into your web pages. So if you ever use apt fatpacker in Perl, that's basically the same thing. It's two different worlds, and Webpack can do a lot of other things, but if you look at its core raison d'être, that's it. And just like for Babel, basically you install it, you configure it. Usually in already existing project, the Webpack configuration is pretty scary. If you look at the minimal thing that you have to put in there, you have to put which entry, which file is the main file of your project, from which Webpack is going to follow the thread and basically aggregate everything, and where you want to output the result. So here, for example, my main file will be source index.jsx, and I can do some fancy stuff like pass it through Babel and say that, okay, polyfill all the things that are different in the different browsers such that they will behave the same. You can use some of that super cool autoloader reacting that is going to reload things as soon as I change the code and allow to develop and see the result without having to stop and restart things. So, yep, that's pretty much it. And with that, I'm already done through part 1, the trimmings. Before I go on, I will just look if there's any question in the chat, and we'll let people maybe 10 seconds if they do have questions and want to see something. Scroll, scroll, scroll. Yep, somebody just said in the chat that you don't need to have a single main file in Webpack. And yeah, I mean, when I said that it's doing the same thing as Fatpacker, I also said it does a lot more. To be perfectly honest, I know how to do the basics, and I know how to go and look at the manual when I want to do more, but yeah, it can do a lot of things. You can have all those different files. You can also tell it that, oh, by the way, I'm not only going to bundle JavaScript, but I'm also going to bundle CSS. If it's CSS files, you will do that thing, and so on and so forth. So yeah, if you want to use everything that it can do, it's a beast. And if you want to learn about it, reserve yourself a day or two and a couple of beers because you will need it. And yeah. Anything else? Okay, question. When I compare PNPM with CPAN to show the correspondence with Perl tool. Oh, which one do I prefer? Well, the NPM, PNPM, and Yarn, and basically package installation is where I miss Perl a lot. And I cannot stress enough a lot because, yeah, all that installing things locally to prevent conflict is great. But with Perl and CPAN, I basically have to install one thing once, and I never have to worry about it again, unless, of course, I want to update. And CPAN is quick. I mean, even installing Moose from scratch, if I disable the test, everything is done within, I will say, 5 minutes. Even with PNPM or Yarn and NPM that are optimized, when I add one thing to my dependencies, I usually have time to go and get a coffee downstairs, talk to my spouse, go and check the pond, probably go for grocery, come back, and then it's probably done. It's a killer. And yeah, absolutely. All those things in the JavaScript world are very close to Perl Brew in the sense that you can have all those different copies of repositories and installs of your modules. And but you can also do that straight with CPAN, if I remember correctly. Yeah, your Webpack is fast, but the NPM install, at least on my computer, is slow. I know that with my SSD drive, it's a little faster. Yep, I'm reading as I talk. And yeah, Carton is also a solution on the Perl world for those localized installed. And yes, there's also Milo. Oh yeah, Milo CPM, that was the next version of CPM that I was thinking about. And yeah, those are extremely fast, and I love them all. So yeah, if there's something on the Perl world, of the Perl world that I could bring to JavaScript, the install of modules will be it. And just going to sip a little bit. Okay, and somebody's saying that with Yarn, everything takes only 30 seconds. Might be time that I actually changed my hard drive. Must be said that they're fairly old. So yeah. Yeah, indeed. Somebody just said that I do have a slow hard drive. So yeah, that could be that. And but yeah, benchmark things, and if it works for you, excellent. So let's begin with the game engine. First thing first, if there's anything here that you actually will take away, is use LoDash. Basically, LoDash is the JavaScript version of listutil, listmoreutils, cutlery, refutil, all of the util modules all rolled into one. It even has a functional programming interface via LoDash/FP that is bundled with LoDash itself. And it basically does or provide all the utilities that should be core but are not. And by the way, in Perl, if you actually are not using listutil and listmoreUtil, look into that. That has so many things that are making, I mean, one or two liners that are not horrendous, but that are just longer than necessary. That yeah, sorry, I see comments as I talk, and I'm stopping there. I'm going to see something after that. So yes, so basically all those things provide utilities that make things much more pleasant. And somebody was saying that everything that is in LoDash FP, you can do in vanilla JavaScript. You can do a lot of things in vanilla JavaScript because there's more and more of those utilities that get into core. Not all of them are there. So it's always a trade-off. Yes, indeed, look into how you could do it in JavaScript itself. It's the same thing. By all means, you use the native version, but also look at how LoDash is doing its stuff. And yeah, basically just read the man page once and look at it, because yes, a lot of them are just time savers. Next on the line, something that is very small, but very useful, debug. So that will be a module that is a little close to data printer in Perl. So if you ever wrote some JavaScript, or well, in Perl too, 90% of debugging is actually printing things to know that things are working well. And in Perl, that will be using warn or print. And in JavaScript, usually it's going to be console log. So that's fine. But you can actually do much better. For example, with debug, what you can do is give in a specific file a namespace. So for example, for the game, I will in the file say, okay, this is the game column engine, and you call debug just like you call a console. But the main difference is that if you run your code, if you don't do anything, it's not going to print anything at all. It's going to begin to print stuff if you pass the environment variable debug and you put those specific namespaces. And you can actually put a wildcard to say that add everything that is under my namespace AOTDDS. You can remove things after that. So you can basically fine tune your debugging to exactly the modules that you want. And after that, if you just want to run your stuff and don't want to through your debugging code to remove them as you go along, well, you remove the debug and nothing prints like magic. Next thing, state management. Because of course, you have a game, you want to have a state that is going to hold all that define that specific game. So I looked at different options, and there's of course a lot of state management framework in JavaScript. There's two that I looked at that at the time were popular. You have MobX that basically does reactive programming. And with that, what it does is that you define some variables as observable. And after that, if you have other variables that depend on those, you say that, okay, this is actually going to get computed out of other values. And you don't even have to specify which variables. It's going to be smart enough to know that, okay, is destroy is going to be modified every time that the all is actually modified. And it's going to happen by magic. And in this case, by magic is something in JavaScript called proxies. So yeah, what you don't see is when you tag something as observable or computed, it's going to wrap those variables into proxies that are going to then check when you run that code, what does it depend on, and do the updating after that by keeping a tree of what depends on what. Of course, in Perl, we have ties, and ties are doing pretty much the same thing as those proxies. So I actually, just for fun, tried to create a Perl version of it, mostly to write a blog entry and see if it was possible, and it's totally possible. It actually worked well, and it's out there on cpan if you want to use it. Personally, I find that all those reactive stuff are maybe a little too action at a distance for my taste, but yeah, I see a couple of use cases where actually that can be pretty nice. Now, the other one that for at least that game is a perfect match is something called Redux, and that's basically Redux is a super simple framework. It's based on top of the messaging methodology. And nowadays, people use it a little less, but there's a lot of other frameworks that use the same principle. And if you know one, you will know the other ones. And as you can expect, I could not help myself, and I just did a proof of concept in Perl. I have the blog entry. I also have something on cpan. It's called products. You can look at it. And basically, the idea of Redux is that your state is totally described in a store, which is a regular data structure. And you're not going to modify it directly. What you're going to do is you're going to send messages, or in this case, they are called actions. And you're going to have something called a reducer that's going to take the actions that you send, the old state, and going to generate a new state. And that has the very nice advantage that since you're not touching the state directly, if you have the original state and you have all the actions that happen in between, you can always replay those and know exactly, or you can reproduce the modification of your state. So that's super nice to debug problems as long as you recorded your action. And you can always just take the state as it is, save it somewhere, like say a database. And when you need it again, you just take it back, plug it back into your app, and you can continue from where you were. So yeah, just to show you, that's an example of a super simple game store where I have two ships, they have IDs, they have a status. I have an action where basically I say that this is an action of type explosion. The poor ship that is getting blown up is Enkidu. And it's basically going to take those two things, create the new store, and so on and so forth for all eternity. That I already said. I'm not going to begin to talk about the different things there, the middleware and the reducer itself, because we only have 2 hours. There's of course a lot of sub frameworks and sub things to help with the Redux. Saga is one of them that is pretty nice to deal with all the asynchronous actions and the things that actually need to talk to the outside world. And one thing that Redux use is immutability. And that's also something that is all the rage in the JavaScript world nowadays, where people say that the best way not to mess up stuff is to, instead of modifying structure that you already have, you make copies of it with the modification that you want. And that way you will never actually influence things that you didn't want to influence. So for deep merge, you can do it manually, but there's a couple of libraries that can help you with that. One that I love is called upd. And indeed, I wrote a little something that actually create Redux stores using upd. So yeah, basically, just to show you, if you want to do a deep merge and just use JavaScript, it's totally possible. Here, I want to change my state and just change the destroy value to be true and want to add a crew morale attribute or update it. And that's not too bad, but it's a little verbose. With updeep, that's exactly the same thing. And basically what you do is you pass it, in this case, a hash of all the values that you want to change, and it's going to deeply change them and return a brand new copy of your ship that has the new values. Incidentally, that's something that you can also do with the merge function in LoDash. I think there's also deep merge that are at the proposal state in JavaScript that will make it at some point. But yeah, you have several options to do your things. And if updeep is a little too concise and hard to understand for you, there's something else, another library that exists called EMA. And that one has a slightly different concept. What it does is that you give it your original object, and then in a function, the function is going to be passed a draft of the object that is basically going to be a copy that you can modify just like it was regular mutable object. And when you actually finish that function, it's going to apply all those differences that you put in there, and it's going to return to you a brand new object. It also has the nice little good thing that it can also give you what exactly is the diff of the modification that you did. So you can also keep track of, okay, actually what was modified in that function. Next on the list, schema description. So JavaScript, just like Perl, is typeless by default. I mean, you have basically scalars, arrays, hashes, and after that, you're on your own. And in the last couple of years, we saw the rise of TypeScript and Flow that actually insert typing into JavaScript that are super nice, but are totally a beast of their own. And there's also something called JSON Schema that is basically a schema where you can define your different structure that your program is going to use. And the JSON schema is different of TypeScript and Flow in the sense that it does nothing at compile time. You can actually at runtime compare your arguments or any structure with a specific schema. Swagger that we're going to see in a few minutes, its type is using a subset of JSON schema. So if you learn one, you learn the other. Since it's something that is usually checked at runtime, you can have types that actually refer other parts of your structure. So for example, here if we have an engine and we have the max rating of the engine and we have the current thrust, in TypeScript, we could say that both of them are number, but that's the extent of it. In JSON schema, you could say that, okay, both are number, but furthermore, the thrust can only be as high as the max thrust and no more. So yeah, that's something that is nice. So yeah, it's JSON though, so it's a little bit verbose. So that's an example. Yeah, it's, again, not a nightmare, but there's a lot of repetition. So yeah, of course, I had to write something. So on NPM right now, you have JSON schema shorthand that basically just provide you a couple of shorthands to type exactly the same thing, but in a shorter way. So that will be the equivalent of the previous slide. And of course, if you have a schema, after that, you want to be able to, well, refer to your schema and you want to look at it. There's surprisingly not a lot of tools out there. There is the one that was the less worse one that I found is called Duxon. And it looks like this. And when I found it, it was kind of unmaintained, so I actually adapted it. I don't have much time these days to work on it, and I would love to make a total rehaul of it, but yeah, we'll see if that will ever happen. Now, next in line, testing. We all love testing. And in Perl, of course, we have tap. We have the good old test more, test most, and that's an old slide. So I should have added test2 v0. In JavaScript, you actually have tap. There's no tap. There's tape, I guess, and and when I wrote the slides for the first time, the king of the hill was the mix of mocha and chai. And mocha and chai are nice. There's something though that I could never get to like is how they actually declared their test to be, instead of saying test, the test name, it used it, such that you could write open quote, real sentences, close quote, like it does the blah. But each time that I read that, I just have Silence of the Lamb in my head, and it's usually super awkward. So yeah, I was not a super huge fan of it. But anyway, nowadays, the king of the hill has been dethroned. JEST is pretty much what a lot of people are using. And that basically just provide you with all the trimmings. You have the test framework, you have the CLI tools, you have all the different expect functions, all bundled into one. And as with everything else JavaScript, it can watch files for changes. It can do coverage using Constantinople under the hood. It can run a subset of the test. And most important of all, you can use it if you want to be creepy, or you can use the keyword test like a decent human being. Nowadays, I had a long phase where I went full native and used JEST. For my own project these days, I return to tap. Because basically with tap, it has much less expect functions, and it's the classical that I know, okay, same, throw, that kind of stuff. And the fact that there's less of them just make it a little simpler to use. And it has basically the classical is what you expect, what you get, and the description that I love. And something also that is very nice for me, with JEST, all the JEST files have to be run with JEST itself because it injects a couple of functions that are not pure JavaScript. Tapped files are just pure JavaScript. You can run them as regular. You can just put node space, the name of the file it's going to run. That's nice for that. So I can use all the other tools that I want. And I want the liberty to, for the mocking and all the finicky details, use whichever library that I'm in love with at the moment. So for example, right now I'm using Sino for mocking, and Tap works beautifully with it. So that's basically what I just said. Familiar Tap syntax, limited number of things, and those are just pure JavaScript. Can you run, somebody is asking if you can run GSTAP with prove. I'm pretty sure you can, because with prove, I didn't do it in a long time, but I seem to recall that you can say that if it's that extension, you run that specific program. So I'm 98% sure that, yeah, you could munch your global prove configuration file, and you could run prove in both your Perl and your JavaScript project, and yeah, basically use a single tool. That's actually a good idea. Thank you. I will have to check that. Documentation. Okay, in most of the fields, JavaScript is, yeah, it's as good as Perl, or in some cases better. Documentation is where I think that Perl is just way above and beyond everything else in the field. Yeah, basically for JavaScript things on NPM, usually the documentation is mostly the README in the repos. And those READMEs are usually unstructured. And basically it's everybody for themselves. I so long for something like Perl where, okay, pod is not the greatest format ever, but at least in my time we had structure. We had the synopsis that was always there with the descriptions, and we had the other things. I lust for that. And also, yeah, I'm old-fashioned. I like my documentation on my hard drive. Even if that hard drive is getting slow, I like to have everything here in case that the internet goes down. With JavaScript, usually what you have is, yeah, you have to go to their GitHub site to see the documentation, and it does not feel right. That's the way people do things nowadays, but yeah. So yeah, a couple of packages that are up there to actually generate documentations. There's GSDoc and ESDoc that are good to take a look at your JavaScript code and auto-generate your documentation. And also it works with annotation and everything. It's not too bad. Usually it ends up with documentation that tastes a little bit dry, like oatmeal dry. You can also have some freeform packages like Gitbook and Docsify that are basically you throw it markdown and it's going to generate the documentation. That is much easier and more nice to work with. But then again, it's much less structured than the first two. And that's the end of part 2. I'm going to look at the chat for 2 seconds, drink a little bit, and see if anybody has questions that they want to ask out loud. It's nice to see everybody going, oh yeah, those Perl documentation were the best. Amen to that. Oops. Oh, hello, Timmy. Okay, so I will begin with part 3, and we're probably at least 3/4 in, so yeah, don't lose hope, it's almost done-ish. So yeah, now the REST interface. So remember that I was talking about JSON schema in the couple of slides back. So yeah, there's that Swagger thing that is actually a schema to define services. And that's something that you can write in JSON if you like pain, or you can write in YAML if, well, basically if you like a different kind of pain. And it's not too bad. Like if you want to define a route here, battle ID, ship ID order, you can say, okay, this is it. And it's going to take all those different parameters that are either in the body of the request or in the path. You can put types that are JSON schema types. You can say that if those things are required or not. Basically, you can flash all that your API is supposed to be. You can even, oh my God, put documentation there. You can put all the different responses that you're expecting. You can put example. It's pretty great. And what is even better is once you're done that, there's a lot of Swagger UI that basically you use a middleware or you use a plugin, and it's going to automatically add an endpoint to your REST service that is going to give you a visual version of your document. And you cannot see it here, but you can also even try the API directly from that page. So that's just wonderful for documentation. I mean, basically, you just put the original details, and then you get your UI almost for free. And yeah, almost for free because people actually wrote plugins in the Perl world. And here I put Denser 2 plugins because I'm a Denser guy. I'm sure that Mojolicious has the same thing. So basically, it's there. On the JavaScript side, you also have the same thing. Yep, somebody confirmed that Mojolicious has it. Excellent. And yeah, on JavaScript, you also have that pretty much for all the different services that exist. So yeah, web app framework. On the Perl side, you have Denser, Mojolicious, if you're old-fashioned Catalyst. On JavaScript, you have, oh God, probably a gazillion options. I kept the main two, Express, that is very close to Denser. It's actually it's part of the Sinatra family, so it's close to that. That pretty much come with all the batteries included, and it's good for 90% of what you want to do. And yeah, somebody's saying that if you can do Denser, you can do Express.js absolutely. And you have Koa. Koa was born already a couple of years ago, and it's meant to be a rewrite of Express, and it's meant to be a minimalistic port of it. And by minimalistic, I mean, oh boy, it's the minimal amount of stuff. Basically, at its core, Koa is going to give you something that can get requests from the HTTP protocol, going to know how to send back a reply, again, using the HTTP protocol. And in between, that's all up to you. And basically, what you do is that you implement your stuff by putting middleware after middleware after middleware. So just to give you an idea, so a middleware will look like something like this. So you have a function that get two things: the context, that is your big bag of information about the current request, and next, that is the pointer to your next call, the next middleware that your chain is supposed to call. So what you can do is look at the context and take the parameters of your route, pick at your body, do whatever you need to do, then stuff your response body back into the context. And once you're done, you call next, and that's it. Koa is taking care of pushing things down the chain. And something, so yeah, I decided to go with Koa because it looks harder. So yeah, I like pain. But there was a cute little module called Koa OAI router middleware, and that works with Swagger. So basically in your Swagger, you add one more field, the OAI controller, and you say that the middleware that is going to deal with that endpoint is in file blah, and you call the function blah, and you run a CLI thing that is going to auto-generate all your different routes based on that. So it's just very nice glue to put all of the things together. That I'm going to pass over super quick because yeah, for authorization in my game, I decided to use the JSON web token because why not? Koa gave us a middleware that does that natively. So super quickly, JSON web token, what you do is that you pass it a specific data structure, if possible, as small as you can. And it's going to convert that into basically a signed version of it that will tell the client that not only this is the information passed by the server, but here's the signature that will prove that, yeah, the server did that and not a man in the middle. And since REST was all nice and everything, I wanted to push the envelope a little bit more. And I wanted to have my web API to actually be able to be interactive with the server. And I played a little bit with WebSockets. So basically, WebSockets allowed the client to talk back directly to the service and keep a connection, a bidirectional connection going back and forth. It's super easy to do in JavaScript by just using the module called WS. And yeah, basically, this is an example of a minimal WebSocket server where basically you create the server. When you have a new client that connects in, you run that function that is going to get the message that it received and see if you specify a given battle, keep that in memory. And then you can have different functions that are going to, when you want to broadcast something, go through all the clients connected and push something back. So, so yeah, and that works super well with Koa. You actually have a middleware. Of course, you have a middleware that can run your WebSocket service on the side and interact with everything that happened on the REST interface. And now databases. Databases are, of course, a huge part of what we do. On the Perl side, of course, we have good old DBI and DBIX class. In JavaScript, you have a lot of things. I like these days objection, which is the upper wrapper that, yeah, basically is like DBX class, and connects that is what is underneath. It's a little bit more bare bone. And just like with DBX class, you can actually, with connects, have some migration of your database schema. So just to give you an example, that's what it looks like. You can create tables, you define all your columns and what type they are, yada, yada, yada. And yeah, basically you can upgrade, you can downgrade, you can do whatever you want. Objection itself is class-based. So what you do is for every table, you define a class. You say that class belongs to which table. You define all the different columns as attribute. And you can add any type of function that you want to add functionality on top of that. So I began to work on that, and of course, I'm using that in other projects. But in the state of my game right now, I thought that, you know what? I don't need all that stuff. What I need is read the state of my game from somewhere put that in my REST server, and when the turn is ended, just save that somewhere else, and just that. I just need basically a key value store. So yep, somebody's saying Redis plus JSON. That's one thing. I played also a little bit with CouchDB and PouchDB. That is also super nice. But at the end, I went with the super basic stuff, local storage that comes from the browser, but there's an old version. And it's basically, yeah, key value at its most brutal way. You just put a file, and then you can save key values in there. You can retrieve them, and that's it. That's all. And yeah, I was chuckling. Somebody was saying that that Connect stuff looks brutal even compared to DBX class schema loader. It's true, and yeah, there's a reason why I went to PouchDB. In the meantime, it's making things a little easier because you don't have to deal with actually defining the schema. And yeah, Connect is not the best ever, but then you define your schema only once or every migration, which hopefully is not a lot of times. So a little bit of pain there is not that bad. Oh yeah, and I just wanted to add that for that local storage thing, there's an extra level of goodness, because remember that I'm using Redux. Well, Redux has one middleware that you can just say that, oh, by the way, Redux, here my storage. Each time that you actually change your state, push it there. So I don't even have to worry about saving my state every time that it needs to be saved. It's just done automatically in the background. Magic. And that's the end of part 3. Part 4 is going to be the shortest because there's not a lot of Perl equivalent. I'm again going to pause 10 seconds to read the chat, see if there's any question, and drink because I'm slowly drying up here. Okay, somebody's asking if I ever played Mongo with Mongo and Mongoose. A little bit, actually. Yeah, I played with those key value stores and tried the different ones. Mongo just add a little bit of a more beefy feel to it. So at the time, I went for CouchDB, which is an in-browser and in-program version of CouchDB that has the nice attribute that you can run it on SQLite. So if you just want to develop something small or just want to develop a prototype on your machine, you just need the SQLite files instead of the whole service shebang. So that's nice. And somebody is proposing to saving to dev null and fetching from dev urandom. And yeah, you're evil. Not wrong. And that could be interesting, but evil. Okay, strap in. We are for the last part. That one is going to be short, I promise. So the web UI, because yeah, so far we did a lot of things, but we have absolutely nothing to show to our dear players. So first, component frameworks. In the Perl world, of course, well, actually, I saw the other day that now we have Web Perl, where you can run Perl that has been transpiled using what's it called, assembler VM. Anyway, you can run in a browser, but yeah, typically we don't do that. So in the Perl world, we have Mason, we have Template Toolkit, we have all these other template frameworks. In JavaScript, of course, you have React, you have Vue.js, you have Angular, you have Svelte, you have, just wait one more week, you will have one more. There's plenty of them. Just quickly, I'm not going to dive into any of those because I could speak for literally days before I'm done with any of them. But if you look at a component in React, what it will look like is basically a pseudo HTML tag and a lot of JavaScript around it. And yeah, React, if you love JavaScript, React is going to be a boon. If you hate JavaScript, yeah, that's not going to be so good. And I must say that it looks slightly weird. It gets a little while to get used to, but eventually you do. So if you ever want to try it, take courage, settle on for a couple of days, and eventually it will become second nature. These days, by the way, I prefer Svelte just because it's newer and it's, I'm going to open the quotes here, closer to the middle, close the quotes, and I'm having fun with it, but that's a story for a different day. Yeah, so I just wanted to show a Svelte version of the same thing, and you still have a little bit of JavaScript, but at least the part that is meant to be HTML-like is much more like HTML. So yeah, in my mind, it's a little easier to get used to if you never actually work on one of those JavaScript component frameworks that exist out there. One nice thing is that for all the different components like tabs and carousel for pictures and all of that, there's an endless version of toolkits. For example, in React, I lately was using Blueprint.js. In Svelte, there's Svelte Material UI that is close to the Google Material guidelines. There's a gazillion of them. Some of them are more for mobile apps. Some are more for the desktop. You have some that have absolute wonderful documentation, some that are more bleeding edge. Yeah, just look at them all and pick the one that you want. Now, my game is a spaceship game, and a spaceship game is not a spaceship game without spaceships. So I wanted to have graphics. And I'm not a graphic developer, so I wanted to have simple graphics. So for that, you basically have two different things. You have Canvas, which has a JavaScript interface and is strictly in browser. And you have SVG, that is basically just generic markup language. It can be styled via CSS. And yeah, SVG is my first love, so I decided to go with it. And also, we says web pages, says styling. So of course, CSS is the basic thing that bind them all. You have, on top of that, you have a lot of things. You have Sass that originally came from the Ruby world that is a kind of language on top of CSS. You have post-CSS that is pretty much like Babel, but for CSS, where it takes all the proposals that are out there and transpile them into regular CSS. And just like Babel, basically you install it, then put a configuration file that says which of the specific plugins you want to use. And after that, you write your CSS using all those plugin features, and it's going to be transpiled into regular CSS at the end. For testing, so of course you have tab, you have ways to look at your different bits of code via the command line. Something that I love, absolutely love, is called Storybook. And what it does is that it allows you to test and see each of your web components one by one. And so basically that allow you to just develop quickly your different bits without having to always reload the full application. And yeah, we've all been there. You want to develop something that is actually only accessible via 3 submenus. So each time that you compile, you have to open the application, go there, deep down, and you have to trigger the specific condition where that feature appears. With Storybook, you can add just that component right there, and you can add couple of stories with all the different scenarios that you want. You have a lot of plugins that can give you documentation, can be used for reference guide. And basically, that's what it looks like. So you have your component that render here. And here you can see my glorious, super fancy graphic of the spaceship and firing arc. And on the side, you have all the different stories that you have. And for your different components here, you can also have knobs where you can say that, okay, actually change the art to be something else, and it's going to update the component on the fly. It's pretty nifty, I like. And I think, yes, that's it. You made it all. So yeah, that's the end of my slides. Is there any questions?
Feel free to switch to voice here, anybody who wants to ask anything.
Yep, somebody's asking, can you see the game? Yeah, that's funny. So you see all those technologies that I show you there. The thing is, as soon as I see something new that I think I will like, I decide to rewrite the game using that. So right now, I'm in the process of moving things to Svelte and my Updocs thingy. It's kind of beginning to work. It's, again, still very, very rough. But yeah, I will try to put links in the, I guess the best place will be the meetup chat for this meeting. And yeah, you can have a look at it. Just remember that that's my math scientist project. So I think you have something like 6 different stratas of different variations that I wanted to experiment with, and it matched my brain, so it's spatial. But yeah, I will put links, so you will be able to open by yourself. And by the way, I'm on Twitter. I'm in a lot of places. If anybody want to chat about it, anybody want to play with it, want to join development, I will be stoked to have other people help me with it. And it has a nice thing that since that game plays with the logical part and with the web part and the REST interface, there's basically a little bit for any type of taste. So yeah, join me on the dark side. I will be delighted. Somebody's asking, does component means React component, or there's a more generic agreed upon component? When I say it here, I mean just the basic thing nowadays where you develop all your pseudo HTML tags and that do a little piece of logic. There's a standard called web components that are yeah, basically JavaScript generic components, I think. And yeah, all the different frameworks have their own way of defining those components. Somebody's asking, oh, do I prefer to have EV clients with React and everything, or more server-based? Depends. Must be said that right now, like for that game, I'm coding for a user base of right now exactly 1. So I didn't begin really to think about hardcore performances because yeah, basically that's only me. Yeah, there's a whole lot of huge discussion about performance, and it's funny because the pendulum is just swinging back. You add first CGI, then you add denser, Mojolicious, catalyst, and all of those things. And then people went, no, let's do JavaScript, and let's do JavaScript in the browser. So server is going to be super simple. And then you had React and all the other ones. And now people are saying that, okay, yeah, those things in the browser are great, but you know, a web page that needs 5 megs just to say hello world and buy my t-shirt is maybe a tad too much. So the JavaScript world said, okay, let's take the JavaScript that is in the browser and put that on the server and have servers that actually render HTML. That has never been done before. This is new. And yes, so now you have all those things that have also the server-side rendering. And that's something that I didn't play a lot with yet, but eventually I will. And by the way, because I'm playing with all those things there, it means that I have shallow knowledge of all those different things, and I can probably bullshit my way 2 minutes to make you believe that I know what I'm talking about. But yeah, there's a lot of them that I have general knowledge, but for anything deeper, I just have to dig like anybody else. And somebody's having a heart attack, that server side is already back. Yep. And of course, there's also the hybrid where it's going to first render on the server and it's going to push that and also a little bit of JavaScript when you request it, such that you still have those activities that happen in the browser that cannot be done on the server. So that's a whole other kettle of fish. And yeah, if you want to have me for a different session of 3 hours, I can totally do it.
So how much fur does this yak still have on it? Because I love how your talks are always, these are all of the pieces, and then we get to the game and it's like 5 minutes.
So basically, right now, what I have is the game logic is having ships that move, that fire the basic weapon, and that record if ships are destroyed or not. The REST service is super simple. It's just getting orders, run the new thing, send it back. The website is beginning to be able to show back the SVG like it should and as a command panel. All of that right now looks like crap, but it's beginning to work. So, so yeah, I guess that the answer is that it still has a lot of fur on it. But on the other end, that's fine. A couple of years ago, I just accepted the fact that that's a game that will probably never see the light of day, that it's only going to be my perpetual, let's experiment with things there. And maybe one day I will prove myself wrong, but until then, I'm just happy to walk the path instead of looking toward the destination. At least that's what I'm telling myself at night to be able to sleep a little bit. And yes, I still need a logo. That's true. Oh God, I forgot about that. Thank you. And by the way, I also skipped a lot of the game itself because I have the feeling that, or at least I thought that people will first be more interested into the technology instead of somebody's pet project. If you actually are interested into the project, oh, by all means, let me know and I will be delighted to bore you to tears with all those details.
That was a good talk, though, Gizmo.
It's a good talk. Any tips on, follow-up of, oh, hey, this piece was interesting. Just, go read the README for, grunt or gulp, or how do the kids get into the JavaScript these days?
Yeah, well, I gave you a link to those slides. One thing that I try to do is to put links on all the different projects' main sites. So, so yeah, the thing is, if you're interested by Redux, click on that link and look at the documentation. If you want, also ask me for a lot of those things. I have blog entries where I just talked about it. If you want to have a unique view of those things. When I was harping on the documentation state of JavaScript, I have to say that the big projects usually have good documentation that is not standardized, so that get my goat, but at least documentation is there. So yeah, look at the names that stroke your fancy, look at their documentation. Usually there's examples. If you actually want to know more about somebody who played with it, poke me anytime. And yeah, adopt a pet project that you can work on without pressure to have it finalized, and give it a try.
Curious.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm just curious. You know, with the Perl community, most packages are community driven. We don't have big corporate influence like when you see things like React and such in the JavaScript world. How do you find, I mean, the JavaScript world is moving so fast. How do you find that balance between community driven, corporate driven, and does it affect your choices and what kind of packages you're using?
Oh yeah. Well, one, yeah, it's true. The JavaScript world is moving super fast. And at first, the main challenge was just to finish learning a framework before the next one was there. Yeah, there's like React is it Facebook? Yeah, I think it's Facebook. And yeah, there's a lot of big backers. Interestingly enough, there's a lot of also community-driven development, and there's also a lot of the same pressure points that there's a lot of modules or packages that are key that are not sponsored by anybody. So something that JavaScript install began to do, well, recently in the last 2 years or so, is when you install things, now you have please to sponsor those packages, and please send money for their Patreon account and things like that. And you have a whole philosophical discussion that people said, well, packages should not spam installs with plea for money. And other people say that, yeah, but those maintainers need to eat at the end of the day. And it's the same thing in the Perl world. I mean, there's a lot of things that we do for the fun of it. But when you think at how many companies are based onto that, it will be nice if somebody was like actually paid to maintain things. And yeah, that's a question for the whole open source movement, and it's true in all the different platforms. Now I have to say that I have a knack to pick frameworks and tools that are the losers in the long run. I remember when Moose came up, I said that Object Inside Out is much better. And a couple of years later, I went, maybe not so. When DBIX came about, I said that, well, RoseDB is much cooler, and yeah, not so. So I have a love for the underdog. I have a knack for picking stuff that at the end will not make it. So don't trust me. Hear what I'm seeing, but never trust me.
Yeah, let us know what you think is up and coming so we can short it.
Exactly. Yeah, somebody is saying that going from Perl to JavaScript, one of the big things is asynchronous programming and promises. Very true that, well, we have promises in Perl. We also, we have a couple of modules that does it. One of them is currently maintained by me, of course. But yeah, that's not something that is core to us. In JavaScript, it's getting more and more core to a lot of libraries. So that's something that we have to know. And it's not that bad. It's just a different mind frame, and it's kind of cool. So yeah. Again, if somebody wants to talk about it, or if you want me to talk about it, by all means.
So with everything being so fast moving in the JavaScript community, how do you sort through all that noise and find out the things that are worthwhile from the things that are crap? It's not exactly a technical question, and some things are obvious. It's easy to find a lot of good information about React and Angular and whatnot, but there's like a whole middle tier of quality projects and frameworks like Express and Happy and whatnot. It's like, how do you find those?
Yeah, I find them usually. I keep a close tab to my Twitter stream and see what is being discussed at the time. And yeah, I try, like I work at Infinity, and there I make sure that I subscribe to all the channels. And personally, I love to tinker, and there's not a framework that I don't like to try. So usually what I do is that if something seems to be fine, I'm going to test it in one of my pet projects, usually that game, which is why it's never going to be over. And yeah, basically at first you learn about it, and usually you know that you begin to have a grasp of that specific tool when you begin to hit its specific corner cases and where it sucks. A wise person will probably learn to live with the suckiness and just deal with one framework. Me, I just go to the next one. And also, I'm taking React's Svelte. What I did is I first did things in React, then did exactly the same thing in Svelte, and did the same thing in Vue. And that gave me a taste of all the different flavors and which one I prefer. And of course, there's also the thing that simplify things is when you're a consultant and you go and you work on something that already exists, you don't have to choose. And for me, that's often is a boon, because I don't have to agonize which one do I want this week. It's, okay, that project is using React, then, well, I guess React it is.
That's a definite curse of mine with any personal project that I work on. It's like, what am I going to choose of the 8 different things that I'm interested in right now?
Yep, mine too. I mean, yeah, that's the thing that and the thing is, I'm super quick to jump the gun and say, okay, I'm going to release my own. So you have the extra level of, oh no, not again. And, but it's a great way to learn. And in my case, it works pretty well because, yeah, right now I'm consultant. So with knowing a little bit of all those frameworks, I can go in at any customer, and when they will say, okay, do you know Vue? I will go, of course I know Vue. And I will be able to talk for 2 minutes, and then I hang up, and I can actually read all the deeper stuff that I didn't know at first. And yeah. I'm just thinking I can stop sharing my screen. I can see your faces. Awesome.
So Andrew, to answer your question in chat, I'm always interested in hearing about people's pet projects, even their work projects and the different tools and things that they're working on. I learned a lot from other people's successes and failures. It's really interesting to hear about some challenge or some problem people have run up against, and then get a nice little post-mortem about it. I mean, I like to be a sponge for these kinds of things. I always think that there's something that I can learn from things that people do good or things that people screwed up. So.
And the nice thing with talks is that instead of trying things by yourself, you can have somebody else that by proxy will try it, will report in the nice little format of 1 hour. And that way you can decide if it's worth your time. So basically I did all of that for all of you. I sacrificed myself and you're all welcome.
We appreciate your sacrifice. Also, it's a very wise crowd because none of you actually fell for my volunteering trap there, where you say what you want to talk about. Yes, and then surprise, you're speaking next month. But surprise, you're speaking next month, so you're gonna have to figure it out.
Which, by the way, we are always looking for speakers here at Charlotte Perl Mongers. So if there's something that you're dying to get off of your chest, we would love to have you.
Indeed.
Thank you so much, Yanick. It was. I'm very grateful to you taking some time out of your evening to come talk to us. And
oh, that was wonderful. And thank to all of you to actually stick to the end.
And I by the attendance tonight. It was really good to see so many people from so many different places come to this. So I don't know what we're doing for June yet. We might have some sort of live viewing party or post-mortem for the Perl conference, since this meeting next month will run it around the same time. So
right.
And I don't know if our meeting will be virtual still, or if we'll be socially distanced at a local pub or whatnot. Details to follow.
Oh, where did my comment go? So yeah, all the way back to the top of the yak, more about your blog platform. Just the presentation. What did you super customize your reveal theme, or is this an off-the-shelf? If so, which one?
It's pretty much off the shelf. It's reveal-md, and the theme is dark.
Just dark? Okay.
Just dark.
Yeah. You are.
Goes with the content.
Yep. And I didn't go super wild with the munging of the markdown. I just
I was wondering about that.
Yeah, change a couple of things such that if I want to have the slides that go down instead of the side, I have the pound sign and then a small V as the arrow. And that's pretty much it.
Okay. I make mine almost as esoterically, writing them in org to export to reveal, which has a huge impedance mismatch, which makes it that much better. And it's the only time I use Emacs is for org. So it's a very smooth system. And once I get it working, then, there's a talk in there.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if PanDoc goes org to reveal.
Sorry, what was that?
Well, I asked because, like I say, I write my last few talks I've written in Markdown to reveal using PanDoc.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And I wonder if PanDoc can render org. I don't know.
I believe it can, and there's actually a org export through PanDoc, which you could probably then tell to do reveal rather than using the default. Oh yes, good. Now I have a new distraction to try. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. My poor blog. My poor empty blog. All right.
Well, I'm a recent convert to Markdown, so that's,
Actually, because I'm the old Perler at my new job and no one knows regular expressions, I actually had to give a talk just yesterday to my new coworkers, and I used Perl to generate Markdown, which I pasted into Reveal, including all the special section fragments to reveal what every regular expression would match and why and that sort of thing.
Ouch.
Yes.
Andrew, what editor
It's
do
good,
you
and it's like a decade old.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
What was that last one? I missed it. All right.
Oh, I was asking what editor do you use?
It's normally Vim, and that's why my Emacs is all Space Max with evil bindings, which is just close enough to be wrong.
I thought, because like for some reason I was looking at org mode the other day, and I thought, is there a plugin in Vim that does org?
Yes, and no, it does not.
Okay, I just saw because I just like,
there is a plugin. It's just not very good.
okay, because I saw it's like, no, I'm gonna stay in Markdown for my stuff.
Yeah, I mean it's a really small subset that it supports.
Okay.
Org is literally amazing. Like you go in and you write tables, and then they like auto justify to like fit, and then you can say, oh, actually that's a spreadsheet, so make some calculations, and you're just like, what? It's, you know, it's a lot of what you get out of like a Jupyter notebook type thing now, only it's just all right there in your local screen. Yeah. And code blocks, and then you say run this and save the results or don't save the results, and it's a great place to get lost in. Yeah. And I take that back. I also use it. I was using it at work when I was writing a lot of SQL to make SQL blocks and then evaluate them remotely to the Redshift cluster to get the results back, so that I could then, you know, make a table of them and then do local munching on them.
This is
Yeah, I did that. Okay. It's a really great tool if you can get over the whole, you know, Emacs thing.
That's why we make fun of Emacs, right?
Some people can, some people can't. You know,
All
2
right.
years in, it's pretty good. All right.
Good to see you guys.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
stopping
This
by.
was so much fun to go to a meetup that I didn't run, and it's just like fun. So thank you.
You're welcome.
All
Hope
right.
to see you again another one of these.
All right. And in a
Thanks
year
for
or two,
having
when
us on.
LAPM gets its stuff together, maybe we'll do another one. And if any of you are in town, let us know. So we will hide.
I don't know. The virtual meetings are kind of nice because you can bring in everybody from everywhere just cheaply.
Right?
Yeah.
And nobody steals your beer. Oh, wait, that's a downside.
Well, my beer's over there. So.
Well, Toronto PM still does broadcasts, so anyone can join those ones.
And
And
there's one
isn't there
tomorrow,
one
right?
in 2 days? Tomorrow?
I think it's tomorrow, actually.
Okay.
Do we have a topic?
I'd have to check. Alex Beamish is running it now. I
yeah.
used to run Toronto PM for a few years, and then I burned out.
As one does. I made a physical one one winter in Toronto, and that was fun. So now when I go to the meetups, I feel like, you know, I'm basically regular.
Oh, wait. You were at Say What? You came to our December social?
Yes.
Ah, I remember you now. Like, how do I know?
I love Say What.
What was solid?
And Dave, did he steal your
definitely
beer? Is that why you remember?
Thanks,
That is
Jason.
quite
the hair.
likely.
Yep.
All right. Bye, Yanick.
Boy,
Bye.
Thanks, Yanick.
Thank you.
pleasure.
You're bounce. All right.
That's been years since I've been to Say What. That's a great place. So, thank you, everyone. Glad you could make it. I will. I'll broadcast the next couple of meetings as soon as I have plans for them. So.
Well, thanks a lot, Jason. I hope we kept Theron this was exciting enough to keep you awake.
Definitely.
It's about 1 a.m. over there now, so still awake.
He's
Yay.
still there. Yeah.
I don't feel quite so bad for telling me it was happening then. All right.
Right. Take care, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Perfect. See ya.
Goodbye.
See ya.